we are creating conditions that will soon make human life as we know it impossible on Earth. In the greater scheme of things, we're only a small part of nature, and a short period in the planet's existence. So the story would be that we were here shortly, ended in self-destruction, the planet got over it, on to next chapters. But from a subjective human perspective, at least out of survival instinct, I'd like to contribute to a slightly different story. A story in which we play a positive part in the ecosystem, rather than the villains we find ourselves to be now. And that requires from us a fundamental change. We can no longer do business as usual. And doing no harm is just not good enough. In the documentary Inhabit, Ben Falk makes an inspiring statement to which I deeply relate. He says, "I want to live, and I want the lives around me to be better because I have lived." I am amongst many who believe we, humanity, are in need of transformation.
As we might know, nature is changing. We call it climate change. It is not unprecedented, and the planet will get through it just fine. However, we humans perceive it as a crisis, because it threatens our existence.
We can recognize these multiple crises affecting us in our world right now. Looking at our world as a system, these negative events are outputs of our inputs. They prove the dysfunctionality of our inputs, our actions, how we build our homes, how we get our food, how we measure value, and so on. Judging by the negative feedback we are receiving, this input seems questionable to say the least. It becomes clear that we should act differently.
A fundamental problem of our current system is that at some point we forgot that we were part and deeply connected with a much greater system. We're functioning in a belief that we're above that system or separate from it.
Denying our interconnectedness got us in a lot of trouble. So in order to act differently, to do better, we need to shift the way we see ourselves and our world. We need to move away from an anthropocentric mindset, meaning the egocentric belief that we are separate and above all else. We need to connect to an eco-entangled one, acknowledging and embracing our part in the ecosystem.
Ultimately, the question is not how we can get the most out of what's around us, but how we can give the most to it. How might we actively and with our whole being beneficially contribute to our world?
That all sounds great and maybe a little too idealistic. So how do we do it? How do we change our mindsets?
A big part of transforming and forming our mindset is played by our bodies. That is because through, with, in our bodies is how we experience the world. It is the only means we have for experiencing and relating to life. And our experiences are what determine our worldviews. So luckily for us, we are conscious beings, which means we can have a bit of a say in what and how we experience. By nurturing and practicing the connection between our minds and our bodies, we can first of all observe and also act upon this.
Firstly, about the observation part. We can become aware of how our bodies are feeling both physiologically, body temperature, heart rate, changes and so on, and psychologically, emotions, thoughts. We can feel ourselves and also reflect on what we are observing.
Through mindful movement, we can open up to what's already happening beneath the surface of our conscious awareness. So this attendance to the present moment allows us to engage more subtly with our experiences as they happen. Thus, it becomes possible to cultivate and purposefully nurture certain qualities within those experiences.
Within the Feldenkrais method, for example, an established somatic practice, a capacity for detailed awareness of and sustained awareness through movement is viewed as a foundation for achieving changes in all areas of life. So, just engaging, non-judgmentally, in listening to what's going on inside is a radical act of transformation.
Secondly, about the acting part. In movement, we can practice certain principles that we want to cultivate. For example, principles that relate to an eco-entangled worldview. Connection and improvisation are two that are particularly relevant for this worldview.
Because connection means the understanding that we are elements, intricately interrelated within a complex whole. We are part of something bigger than ourselves. And that means, on one hand, that we do not have control over everything that happens, that there are other forces at play which are at least as important as ourselves.
It also means, on the other hand, that everything we do affects all the other elements which we are so elaborately related to. So, if we see ourselves within this system, we understand that we humans are only small parts connected in the greater whole, not more and not less important than any of the other parts.
Improvisation, the other relevant principle, represents the unpredictable, the emergent character of this whole. Nature is ever-changing, as are we, and there's no saying what happens next. Sure, we can have somewhat accurate predictions or educated guesses, but we cannot know, and we shouldn't fool ourselves with the illusion that we can.
However, what we can do is to be present and adapt as best as we can to our current conditions as they emerge. That requires from us a tremendous capacity to improvise, to be open and flexible in order to be able to embrace and not resist to the spontaneity of life.
So, connection and improvisation. These two principles are quite common in many movement practices too. To begin with, physically, connection can be seen in two layers, one internal, within ourselves, and one external, outside of ourselves, both of which can be practiced in movement through specific exercises.
Firstly, connecting within ourselves means relating our thoughts to our feelings, to our sensations, and exploring these relationships within our bodies. These internal dynamics become visible in things such as our range of movement, our postures, and our entire movement repertoire. They represent who we are, and they are continuously transforming, expanding, continuously in movement. And we can have a slight influence on the direction of this movement, not too much. It's not all the result of our individual willpower, but enough still.
We can choose to move more in ways that are accepting and compassionate to ourselves, to our thoughts and feelings. We can choose to move more in ways that focus on the profound interactions between our minds and bodies.
Secondly, we can connect outside of ourselves, to other people, to our environment. Our sense of self is not created in isolation, but it is the bundle of all the relations within all the systems that we are part of. Our family, our city, our ecosystem. At all times, we are affected by and have an effect on our social and physical environment. We can say that our own movements are part of greater improvised choreographies. Navigating the complexity of life means dancing at all times with everything around us.
Improvisation, the other relevant principle that we can work on. Within movement practices, improvisation is a technique that enables authentic movement. In their book about the art and science of dance and movement therapy, Jacqueline and Wingrower write that authentic movement are a naturally learned expression of man. They also explain that an individual's personal movement repertoire is acquired by sensing, by feeling, by watching, by trying, by experimenting and creating.
And it is through authentic movement that we can access these experiences. And by access them, I mean, on one hand, to become aware of them, to engage in observation. As mentioned earlier, bringing these experiences into consciousness is in itself a radical step in creating transformation. And on the other hand, accessing them gives us the possibility to work with them. We can connect to our lived experiences, and to a certain extent we can determine how they affect us.
Therefore, by accessing our embodied experiences, we access our ability to influence our movement repertoire and subsequently our mindsets. And a way of granting ourselves this access is by enabling a space of spontaneity within our bodies through improvised movement. That means allowing ourselves to be present in every moment of our lives, and from this presence adapt and respond to our circumstances.
There's a wonderful quote from Alan Watts where he says, "The only way to make sense of change is to plunge into it, to move with it, and join the dance."
Life surprises us all the time. To effectively cope with all the unknown and unexpected, we need to welcome it with more acceptance and engage with it with awareness and connection.
Moving towards a conclusion, there's this quote from the same book about dance and movement therapy, which seems to really put the finger on it. It goes as follows. We know that change is genuine when it becomes part of our own spontaneous movement repertoire. Because our movement repertoire emerges out of how we engage with and how we adapt to our world. Ultimately, it's a representation of who we are. Therefore, we need to develop it so that we embody principles of eco-entanglement. Through our bodies, we can become more aware of and more connected to ourselves, to the people around us, and to the environment. This way, we can become, with our whole being, active participants in the ecosystem. And the thing is, whether we like it or not, we're already part of it. So we'd only be accepting and making space for what's already inside of us, which I believe is spontaneous, connected beings. And that, as I've experienced it, is beneficial for the well-being of nature, as well as for the well-being of us humans as positive parts of it. This is the story I want to contribute to.
This
is the story
I want to contribute to.
Contribute to.
To contribute to.